Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for everyone who is able to join this afternoon for another episode of our podcast. And this afternoon, I have a special guest, slightly different format than usual, because will be interviewing our own Dr. Carl van Heerden. Carl, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So usually my guest is a leader in healthcare from a client organization or an ally of Wimmy, but today it's a leader within our own organization, and that's because we want to introduce a new service to everyone here in the room, but we also have a broader conversation about AI and some of the challenges and the risks that come with the use of AI in healthcare. Before we go there, let's start maybe, Carl, if you can explain to our listeners a little bit more about where you come from and how you got where you are now. I think that's always useful. When we met some years ago, you shared your CV, and a first thing that stood out for me is you started off in the humanities faculty. You studied languages, Hebrew and Greek, ancient Greek. But then you decided, actually, I want to become a doctor. So you studied medicine. You were a practicing physician for some years, and now you are a large language model expert. So you went from language to medicine, back to language, but slightly differently. Maybe just explain that whole journey.
Yeah. So I'm a believer in a well-rounded education, even though it might be a long one, but I believe in the concept of lifelong learning. So our first degree was in theology and humanities, where we did some languages and philosophy and theology as well. And then after that, I completed my medical training, worked for about 7 years, mainly in internal medicine and emergency medicine. And then, subsequent to that, started at Wimmy as a medical data scientist. I think the main thinking behind that was like I was seeing all of these technical modalities emerge. So I was excited to be part of all of the technological innovation I'm developing, realizing full well that you do need the clinical expertise behind that. So you do need to have clinical practitioners, doctors and nurses saying, okay, well, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. And also, like, I think in a way, I'm advocating for the patients. I think that's been something that's been really drilled into us as doctors, that like you put the patient first and then everything else becomes simple. So even from the point of view of working in tech, that's still, I think, a good motto to hold to. That in healthcare, it's, at the end of the day, it's about driving patient outcomes. So now, from this side, from the tech side, from the medical data science side, and now from the AI and language model side, the aim is still to hold to that.
Thanks. What I like what you said, and what I also think is not to be underestimated, the importance of knowing how patients think and behave, and knowing how doctors, nurses, physios, clinical managers, what drives them, what constraints do they feel in the real world? Because if you are a really strong software engineer and a really strong data scientist, but you lack that groundedness, you may come up with solutions that work on your laptop, but don't work at scale in the real world. So this hour that we have, we want to focus on some of the challenges that emerge when you want to start using large language models and other agentic AI in healthcare. But I thought before we dive in, maybe it's useful to unpack some of the concepts that are being thrown around and that I think sometimes are used as if they are synonyms without really being precise. So large language models, an agentic workflow, and now for the last year or so, the concept of an MCP server. They are often used in one sentence, but they're not the same thing. And then another concept that is very often used as a liability or as a factor to take into account is the idea of tokens. So maybe if you can just help us understand how all of these concepts hang together.
Okay. Yeah, so I think a lot of that comes from the fact that language models at their heart is a very technical thing. Like it's literally mathematical innovations that allowed us to convert language into numbers. And then when language is converted into numbers, you can use your computers in the processing of it. And then when you can do that at scale. So like the machine learning used to be a very esoteric field, starting with statistics, proper predictive modeling, the neural nets that started with vision neural nets, and then later natural processing as well. But it was sort of the province of people with PhDs and very deep understandings of math. But now, since AI has become more widespread, particularly since ChatGPT was released to the public, a lot of hype became associated with it, and a lot of the hype train. So you have on the one hand these very technical core concepts that underlie all of AI, and then you have on the other hand like the YouTube videos and the LinkedIn posts and the common parlance of people that, yeah. So like if we look at just try and disambiguate the terms a bit, so a language model at its core is a neural network that allows you to convert language to numerical tokens, and those tokens can be processed, and then you can output more tokens that are also numerical, but that can be converted to language. So that's like we've always done that natural language processing, but with the development of attention and transformers type networks, that became the natural language processing became really, really good because of technical mathematical reasons. And so you have a language model that you can input language and it outputs language. And that's the first sort of iteration of what we know like ChatGPT can do. You can ask it questions and it can answer. But then we realized that like you can't store all the knowledge that you need to have to do really good outputs within the language model itself, within those model weights that are literally just matrices, like 8 billion numbers in a matrix. We want to give the language model tools as well. So we've developed ways in which language models can access tools. So the most obvious example of tool use is web search. So language models can now search the web and look at results and find you more grounded information. But another important set of tools is also the coding, so the program coding part of it. So that's a whole field in and of itself. I think one of the most important fields in language models at the moment is what's happening with regards to the coding agents. But a simple example of what you would have in a coding agent is that your language model now doesn't just output your code, it can actually run the code. And it can run the code in context and see what the outputs look like and iterate based on that. So then when we realized, okay, we want the language models to be able to run tools, we needed to develop workflows around that. So that's where the concept of the agent comes in. So agent is basically like you have a language model as part of the agent, the AI agent, but it's one part of the agent. The other part is all of the tools that the agent can use. So one tool can be web search, another tool can be looking at the database, another tool can be adding entries to the database. But basically, an agent, you give an agent instruction, and then the agent figures out what needs to be done. It creates a to-do list for itself, and it creates an objective. So at the end, while that objective is not met yet, it will continue running tools. So that's where the meme comes from, like while this is not, so like an agent is basically a while loop. And then while the loop is false, it continues running. And then when that condition is met, then the agent stops running. So one example would be like if you ask it a query, like what were the Arsenal results for the last 20 years, then it will search the web until it finds what were the results for the last 20 years. Another one would be a program example where you can say, write me code that is a website that produces these visuals, this dashboard, and it will run code. It will run the agent until that objective is completed. So then where MCP server comes in, so MCP server is Anthropic's sort of standardized language protocol, the model context protocol, to give your language model context on which tools there are and what they should be used for. So this just put into users' hands the ability to give the language models functions that they can use in the service of their objective. So a MCP is of the subset of things that an agent uses, but it's one set of the there was another the other thing was tokens. So tokens, if you use ChatGPT or Claude in your browser, then tokens get spent, but you're not aware of them. But as soon as you start using them via an API, then you pay $20 per million tokens for a certain model. So what that means is if you give it an instruction, your instruction can be like, say, 50 words long. That gets broken down into numbers so that so word parts are tokens. And then so you pay for what you put in for the model to process that. And then you also pay for what comes out, the output tokens. So if there's a 50-word answer, then it'll be a little bit more than 50 tokens as the output. Where this gets complicated and where the tokens go up by a lot is when you have agentic workflows. So if you have your agent, your coding agent write your program, then between the input and the output, there are a lot of intermediate steps of searching the web for how does this Python library work, producing code, looking at the outputs of the code, producing more code, running that against your linter checks, for example. But it's based on the fact that a language model takes tokens as an input and as an output, and that's how they price it.
Thank you. Great. So I hope that was helpful for the rest of the conversation. Let's now that we have some idea of how an agent works and what are the key ingredients of an agentic workflow, if we now focus on the use of agentic workflows in healthcare. So typically what it means is you have a real person, a patient with a medical record, with a concern, a diagnosis, a treatment that is digitized, that lives somewhere in a file in a database. And now we want to use AI to support the patient and or the doctor and or the hospital and or the funder or the government. So there's lots of different stakeholders that may benefit from the use of AI. A key obvious challenge is that typically before the age of AI, medical information is regarded as some of the most sensitive and some of the most private information. I think it's that and financial information. There isn't much more sensitive than your health and your wealth. So what we don't want is cavalierly overshare information and have big corporations like OpenAI or Google or Anthropic just have access to all of the medical information of entire patient cohorts. So can you maybe just paint a picture of what are the routine solutions to avoid that? And why are we having this conversation? So why is it not a solved problem?
Okay, so I think to answer that question, you need to look at all the ways that you can access a language model. So the most obvious way, the way that most people would know, is that you can go on Claude.ai and then you can ask Claude questions, like on the free tier, not logged in, and you can do the same thing with ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini. And if you do that, then they make no promises as to how private your data is, and you cannot expect them to keep what you say private. So that's been a big thing. The AI companies have been known for playing a bit fast and loose in terms of privacy, and because they've made no promises about your privacy, you can accept that that won't be private. So that's one, and like also what we see in practice with healthcare as well as financial or tech or any companies is that often when a company doesn't have a firm and enforced AI policy, people use AI regardless of these concerns. The so-called shadow AI, where you have a question about something regarding your work, and you can just type on your phone ChatGPT, what is the answer to this question? Or like, look at this picture and tell me what's going on. So that's the one tier of AI usage, and that's something that should be very concerning to all of us in terms of the privacy guaranteed. Another way that you can use AI, so on the other end of the spectrum, is you can have locally run models. So the models have developed such that you can have very small models that can do very useful things. So like, for example, on like either of our MacBooks, we can run a llama with models that can do a lot. The smaller models are one of the most important frontiers of AI technological development, where they have become exponentially stronger over the last year or two. But essentially what that means is that you can have all the processing done on your local computer. You can even have your computer air-gapped from the world. Because after that, you've downloaded that model of the internet, you can cut off all internet access. So you can basically have access to AI without any privacy concerns whatsoever. So like there are institutions for where that would be important. I think particularly medical aids or hospital groups with very sensitive information, where all of the data processing must happen on-prem, where they have 100% control over their networks and their security. So that's become an option in the last year, mainly. And then there's the intermediate options. So you can also access frontier models like Claude or Grok via an API. And then so how that works is, instead of using the chatbot on the website, or instead of downloading the model, you can send requests to their API service, and then they send you the answer back. So depending on whether you have an enterprise agreement with the relevant company, you can also ensure privacy. But there are a lot of nuances to this, right? Because the one thing that they can promise you is that they won't train on your data. So that's the very least. The other thing is also that your data cannot be visualized by the employees. Yeah, so like in entering that enterprise agreement, you need to be sure of the specifics of what is promised to you. And yeah, are they reliable in terms of delivering on that? And then there's another option if you want to host models, but you want to host your own models, but you don't necessarily have all of the firepower in your, like a laptop. You can hire cloud GPUs. With AI becoming such a popular thing, it's become much more available. There are many service providers that will that have productized this kind of thing, where you can hire a GPU. The classic cloud providers, the AWS, Google, Azure, they also provide these services. So then you can actually host your own model and have full control of it. But you have access to stronger GPUs than what you physically have available in your office.
Okay, so maybe just for my own understanding, there are multiple options. There's a continuum of options from the least secure, which is I'm just going to use the free tier of ChatGPT, and I'm going to share information through the web app, to I'm going to run a model locally on a machine, either my laptop or a server that lives in the basement. And then there are intermediate options. And so an obvious question would be, what are the pros and cons, not just in terms of security and liability for data breaches, but I can imagine that the costs and the efforts are not the same across these options.
Yeah.
So can you say something about that? Like how good must you be with tech to pick? First of all, how do you decide between these options? And then if you say, well, given my use case, the volume of data, the type of data, is it a once-off? Is it a daily thing? Is it a monthly thing? I think option C out of A to F is the best one. Then what? Do you now have to hire an army of data scientists, or how do you proceed?
Yeah, so that's a very complex question, but I'll try to bucket the use cases a bit. So I mean, like at the end of the day, there's no free lunch, and the products are priced for the companies serving them to make money. So like usually what a lot of companies do if they want to access AI, the simplest way to use it is just using it via API. So you have a contract with Anthropic and you pay them money to use tokens, and then they provide the AI service, they host it, they take care of making sure that there's uptime, which with Claude specifically is an issue these days. But they take care of the technical hosting of of the models and like how they run and like what GPUs and which clusters need to be activated at which stage. So generally speaking, the using an AI model via an API abstracts away most of the technical issues that you have. But if you abstract away your technical problems, then you also have less control over it. So because you have less control over it, like you're unable to do some optimizations that's maybe useful in your particular use case. Like the one thing, well, I'm like not to get too technical here, but you have things like KV caching, you have key value caching, in other words, like caching your queries, so that they can be reused without spending all the compute again. You have less control over which models you use. So if you decide, okay, like you have too little control, you want to rather have your own models hosted on a cloud infrastructure, you can do that. There are so-called open weights models.
Wait. Sorry, before we go to the open weights. So for an enterprise organization that is expecting to run large queries repeatedly, it's feasible and relatively painless to use the APIs. But then what I'm hearing you say is you need to then be prepared to have, you need to be okay with the uncertainty and volatility of the cost that's attached to it.
Yes. Yeah, so I think one big drawback that's become more prominent recently is downtime. So if like before AI, like long ago, like 2024, you basically could accept that if you have like an AWS compute instance or a Google instance or an Azure instance, that those things should be 100% available. Your virtual machine should not be shut down. Like there should be 0% downtime. And the engineers at those places work very hard to ensure that there's a measure of redundancy. But now with AI, there's not enough GPUs to keep up. So for example, Anthropic has actually, if you look at their downtime records over the last month or three, there are times when they're down. So that's a big problem. So like that's the one thing. And the other thing is also costs. So if you are locked into the Anthropic ecosystem, for example, then if they raise their costs 2x, then you're stuck with that. And often what they'll do is, like what's recently been done is like if you want access to the latest models, those latest models are a lot more expensive. They argue that they require a lot more compute, but now your daily workflow becomes a lot more expensive and you have very little control over it.
So tokens are the currency of large language models, and there is a conversion rate between tokens and rands or dollars, but that conversion rate isn't a universal one across all models and across all vendors. It's a specific conversion rate for a particular model and perhaps even for a particular tier. So if you're on this tier, then the tokens cost this much. If you move up a tier, then all of a sudden that same token can cost more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's actually where it becomes quite complicated having AI LLM systems in production. Well, one of the reasons why it's complicated, because even if you use the API as a service, then you still have to choose the model. So sticking with the Claude example, Claude has Haiku, the smallest model, Sonnet, the medium model, and Opus, the largest model. So they are in this ascending order of like how strong and how smart they are, but they cost different amounts because Opus is a lot more expensive to host and the inference on than Haiku is. But to add complexity to that, they have different versions. So depending on which version you're paying for, like they have different quality. And that is something that's very difficult if you're just starting with your project, from the outset, which model is appropriate for your use case. So it helps to have a bit of experience having played with the models before, like which model is strong enough for my use case, because you will pay for the strength of the model.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I get that. And the image that I have is, suppose that I have a bike, a car, and a helicopter, and my own two legs. Then if I know where I'm going, I can decide to walk to the shop if it's within walking distance. I'm not going to take the helicopter. But if I need to be in Joburg fast, then maybe if it's life or death, then the only option is the helicopter.
Yeah.
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 Okay, great. So we spoke, I stopped you when you were going to move from the API setup to the open weight models. So let's go back there. So what are open weight models and how are they different from everything you've said so far?
Sorry. So with the language models, like programming code, some language models live behind closed, locked doors, and you don't have access to them. So, like, if we want to look at the latest version of Claude, you and I cannot do that. We don't work at Anthropic, and we don't have access to that. So, how they train their model, what the technical things where they implemented to that, we have no idea. But there are models that are open weights models, which means that you can essentially download the massive matrix of numbers that makes the model work. And then if they're open weights models, you can download them and then you can inference them on your own machine. So you can essentially use them, you can download them and use them wherever you want. So whether on your own laptop or whether on a cloud virtual compute instance, you can do that. And then there's one more tier to that, the open source and open weights models. So then you have access to the source code as well, which was used to train that model. So like, I think an example of that was with the DeepSeek model when it came out. They actually released the source code as well. So then you could see like how they train the model. So that's more for the technically inclined ones, but like it's so then you can train versions of it yourself. But training models, so that's we're getting into PhD level mathematics there as well. But the point of an open weights model is that you have access to the model and you can download it and run it wherever you want. So if you have that, then you can run it on your laptop, but you can also hire GPUs at, for example, Google Cloud, and then you can spin up a virtual machine there and you can have a model there, and it can be your own model that you fence off. No one can see what's happening there except you. And yeah, so then so now we've said, okay, like you have you can walk or bike or helicopter somewhere, but now with the open weights models, there are many more models. At different sizes, like some can run literally on your phone. Some you need a H100, like 100,000 Rand GPU to run on. So this adds to the complexity, both in terms of initially choosing the model, but also keeping that, like maintaining that. Because now you're tired of Anthropic not maintaining their things, but now you have to maintain it. And there's a lot of technical overhead that comes with that. So that at the end of the day, like most likely per token cost will be down compared to what you'd get from the main frontier model providers. But now you add the technical overhead of someone needs to maintain this. And now you need DevOps and data engineering teams to maintain this, to build this fit for purpose and maintain it and check that those costs aren't running. Because I think everyone that's worked in the field know the problems of like leaving your VM instance running and running up the bill. So now you've added a lot of technical overhead, but you've also had a lot of control over which models. So now you don't run the risk of, with the next iteration of some frontier model, quality drops in terms of something that you actually care about. You also don't have the problem of one of the frontier model providers not supporting the particular model that you like. So recently there was an issue with OpenAI not maintaining one of their ChatGPT, like the old small version that, because like sometimes you just have a model that does what you want the way that you want it, and then the newer one doesn't do it. And if you are hosting your own models, then you've downloaded that model, like it's yours to do with whatever you like. No one can delete that off of your computer. So you've added control, you've reduced costs in terms of tokens, but you've added technical overhead that will remain there.
Last one. So we've spoken about having control over the costs. We've spoken about the trade-off in terms of complexity. We haven't really dived into trade-offs with accuracy and performance. I would suggest we don't do that because I think then we're going to run out of time. But where I also want to go to is besides the dimension of risk for data breaches and the dimension of cost, there are other related concepts around data governance, around privacy and risk management. And another one that we discussed in the past is if you have a very powerful agent, then this agent may accidentally do some damage. It may reset a whole database, or it may break data infrastructure that you carefully built, and all of a sudden it decides actually you don't need this server, or I'm going to rewrite the pipeline and now the data pipeline doesn't work anymore. So can you say something about these other less popular risks and dependencies that we have to be aware of when we start using agents with sensitive data?
Yeah, so agents bring in a lot more. Yeah, so like because an agent essentially can execute any code whatsoever. So you can in the shell line RM, RF route, so you can literally delete your hard drive. Like an agent can do that if you give it the access to do that. So if you want your agent to actually do useful things, you need to give it like a fair amount of access. But so this now adds a lot of complexity in terms of the governance. So you need to control your agent so that it doesn't do bad things. It doesn't delete your database because it thinks that that will solve the problem. And I think we've all heard many horror stories of that. But the scaffolding around your AI becomes very important. So that's something that we've looked at in our research and development work, is the fact that like you have AI readily available now via whichever way that you want the AI, but like we've been looking at the scaffolding around that. So one thing is rights management, that both the person and the AI has the correct fine-grained right and roles management. Another thing is that
When you say rights, not with a W, just R, R-I-G-H-T.
rights,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Because well, some people have used Cursor or Claude Code on YOLO mode, just like do whatever you want, and then they find their whole production database deleted, and then I'm like somewhere in that logs there's someone saying like yes, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that. So when there's a hyped YouTube video that says, look what the agent did, it's not the agent who did it on his own. It's a human who gave permission when the system asked, can I access your hard drive, or can I access your camera? Can I access your email account? Somebody authorized that.
Yeah.
And then a day later.
Yeah, so I think it's like an important point where at the end of the day, like, because like we for our daily work, like we write code, and then if you use like AI assistants to write code, at the end of the day, you're still responsible for your commit. Like you can't say, oh, Claude wrote this bug. No, like you approved you approved the bug that was produced by AI. So at the end of the day, like a human taking responsibility for like what is produced in the same way that the manager to some extent has to take responsibility for the end product if someone under them like fails. Like so like I think like the concept of taking responsibility for your tools has always been there and it remains, and I think some people have ignored it. I know they've paid the price for it. But I think also at the organizational level, that's something that needs to be borne in mind by security teams, information security, where now the surface area for vulnerability to security strikes have become much larger. I'm like the first tier of this is like the internal vulnerabilities from people on your own team doing irresponsible things. I don't think we're going to get to that today, but like the outside risk also, that surface area is much, much larger. But I think like, so whilst on the one hand we can say like, look at all these cool things we can do, on the other hand we have to say that, okay, how are we going to limit the blast radius of bad things happening when we use AI within our systems? And that's a very complex question, and then there's a lot to that.
Okay, so I would want to propose, for the purpose of this podcast, that one answer to that question is to start using an AI factory. So at Wimmy, we've worked on an AI factory, and maybe now is a great time to unpack what that is. So if you Google AI factory, I think you'll find some definitions. Maybe if you can help us understand what is our internal definition of the Wimmy AI factory. How does it work? What can it do? What problems does it solve? And how does it fit within that continuum of solutions that you described, from the very easy to use but dangerous web app to the very hard to use locally installed open weight model?
Okay, so I think that yeah, I think we can share the demo just now. But just like as by way of introduction, like when we were doing the work on our research, our research and development team on the AI factory, we realized that the thing that's really important here is the scaffolding around the AI. So whether you use Gemma for locally run, whether you use your ChatGPT chatbot, whether you use Claude via API call, there needs to be scaffolding around that, where you implement your governance, and where you do logging, all of that. So yeah, so I think we can get to the demo, and we can just demonstrate some of the concepts. Yeah. See the screen? Okay.
Yep.
So I think so basically, I think the first thing that I want to point out here is that something AI allows us to do is to generate synthetic data sets. So for this example, we've created a synthetic data set of patients, so everyone can rest assured no actual humans data is exposed here. And that for us has been a bit of a game changer in terms of our development, and the fact that you can create the data that you want, whether it's electronic health record style data, whether it's medical aims style data, and whether it's blood results, you can create that data with AI, and then you can have carte blanche to do to really experiment with that. So in terms of what we mean when we say that we're looking to build the scaffolding around that, is at the first level, you have permissions. So this is not new within the field of cloud compute. We've always had that, but now we just need to look at how we grant the permissions. So for example, yeah, we just for the benefit of the example, we created 3 types of roles with different types of emissions. So like our agent here can do SQL code to query a local SQLite database with our fake data. And there's specific permissions here. And there's also specifically, I think, the whole personally identifiable information. That's quite a big ticket item in our field.
Just to be clear, those 3 roles, admin, data scientist, and data viewer, are those roles assigned to people, or are they roles assigned to agents?
To people.
Okay.
So to people, yeah. So the people, and then the agent has his own set of rules that it's not allowed to violate.
And would you then, so if I'm a data scientist in an organization, I have certain permissions. Does that then translate into what models I can do, or what the models that I can access can do then?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like the focus with like this particular set of permissions was more privacy, but at the end of the day, like you also have to consider cost. So you'll have people on your team that you are limiting their cost more than others.
So they can't accidentally run a huge query that runs all night and costs massive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm like, you can put queries in the loop and you can run the cost up into the millions of dollars. It's not difficult to run up costs. So I think the first one layer is permissions. The other layer is governance. So I'm going to show you an example now, but like you want rules and you want logging and you want responsibility taking. So for every user, there needs to be logging of what they do, when they did it, so that accountability can be done. We were talking about the tokens, so like we've not experimented that much here, but because we use different models with this, we've also have cost estimates. So this you can throttle, you can limit people from spending too much. But that's also an important part of just keeping things within budget. And this, so like traces, I think that's the one concept that we didn't really get into in the technical explanation. But if you have an agent run, now you have your LLM input, you have the tool calls, the agent's doing things, getting inputs and outputs. There's a whole process, and at the end of the time, at the end of the process, there's an answer. But in between, there were you want to log what was done by your agent and when. So that also needs to be documented, logged, and then if you want to do error analysis on what your agent did, this is where you look, and this is where. So this is also something that we've seen in practice. Like some people have agents do things, but they don't look at the traces. So then your agent comes up with a bad result, but you don't know why, and you don't know what levers you should pull on to fix that.
So this is to avoid a trial and error scenario where you can't get your agent to do what it needs to do, and you just randomly try a bunch of things, hoping that. So you have a better idea of what actually the problem is and where to intervene. And so I guess this trace can suggest, oh, it was a bad prompt versus, oh, it was a bad model.
Yes.
For instance.
Yeah, you're opening up the hood and pulling apart the pieces and saying, okay, like, is this a carburetor error? Is this a water error, radiator error? And this is just to demonstrate so this is an agent that's linked up to a database that are locally hosted synthetic data database. So the way that we've set this up is you can either use Gemini or the OpenAI models, or even a local model that runs on the laptop, a local Gemma model. So for this, I think we'll just use a OpenAI model, and your query can be something that's natural language. So this natural language goes to the LLM model, and the LLM model will convert that to a SQL query that will pull the correct data. So this is a SQL query, and this is like if you're the data scientist working here, you should review this to check that the right things are done. So like this is also another example of there isn't really a free lunch. Someone at the end of the day needs to understand, because if you get a bad result here from your SQL query, you need to actually understand the SQL and delve into this. And then you can execute that SQL query and get the result that you want.
But sorry to interrupt, but there's two things. One is there's transparency about how so the fact that what model are we running?
We were running a OpenAI model.
Okay. So we are burning tokens. We do use the API. We are spending some money, but that SQL query, once we're happy with it, we can rerun. We don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. Is that correct?
So you can cache like CHE queries and results. So we've enabled that for that. So this, in fact, like I ran previously and I cached it so that the demo works perfectly.
Okay.
But you can do that, and you can rerun queries, and you can save tokens that way. And that's part of the scaffolding that you'll build. So like you want to optimize token spend, and that's one of the ways.
Yeah.
And then if something went wrong, you can review the agentic traces. I just want to show one other example here. So that output a table, but because an agent in theory can run any code, you can also plot graphs. So this is a part of the functions we provided to the LLM was a matplotlib plotting library, and you can plot things like this as well. And yeah, so the concept here is that you want to scaffold your AI, and then like once you do that, it opens up your world to do, in this case, analyses, but like basically run any code in a responsible, ethical, safe and secure way.
Okay, thank you. So correct me if I'm wrong, or add if I'm incomplete, but my understanding is that the AI factory that we built is not necessarily an off-the-shelf product that you can just add to carts or it's not I want 5 seats and I'm paying $100 per person per month. It's not that. It's more of an internal superpower that we now have and that allows us to provide better, faster, more performant and safer services to our clients. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, like because this also speaks to the fact that like like our clients have different needs, have different like in terms of like what they would want from AI, how they would use it, like how they deal with safety and security issues. So this then is a way to harness AI within the specific confines of your institutional requirements.
Before we close off and we open the floor for questions, maybe it's also worth to dive into this idea of the synthetic data a little bit more, because so one way to add extra safety layers or security layers is to say I have a real data set that I do not want to share with AI. I'm going to create a clone of that data set that looks like the real one, but it's not the real one. That is the one I'm exposing to large language models, and I'm using large language models to build reproducible, human-readable analytical scripts with SQL, with Python, with whatever language necessary. I'm going to validate those scripts, do the analysis, visualize it as if that's the only job I need to do. And when I'm happy with it, I'm going to swap those data sets around. I'm now going to apply those scripts to the real data. But by the time I do that, I no longer need the AI models.
Yeah.
That is a real possibility that we can now do with the AI factory.
Yeah, so that's a very valuable use case because now you can use the full extent of frontier models and what they're capable of. You can have OpenAI Codex or Claude Code run through your synthetic data set at will, because like no actual sensitive data is being exposed. So you can add a lot of sort of depth and breadth to your technical analysis, and then when you get to the actual data, now you've sort of battle tested your code and you've added a lot of insight and context from what the models can provide, and you've never exposed patient data to any of the frontier model companies.
Great. So I want to make one announcement, and then I want to open the floor for questions. So if anybody has questions for Carl or for me, you're welcome to type them so long. We have a Q&A tab in this team session. I can initiate it, but it's also not necessary to wait for me. So I'm going to say here, questions are welcome. That should pop up. But if you're more comfortable just typing directly in the chat, that's also fine. So while anybody can do that, I want to share some very exciting news with everyone. So on the occasion of launching the AI Factory, we're very excited about it, and we are obviously keen to showcase its value. And so there's 2 offers that I want to make now today, but of course it will stand for longer than just today. The first one is we making 5 slots available between the 20th of June and the 20th of July for an organization that wants us to have a structured and an interactive session with them where we are assessing their current lay of the land. Of course, we can sign any NDA as necessary prior to that session, but the focus of the session would be to assess what are you currently using in terms of AI tools, what data are you exposing to those tools, what dependencies have you implicitly allowed for, and what compliance and security gaps have you, again, explicitly or implicitly created. And the goal of that session is to create clarity, and then not just to say, oh, here's the problems and the risks that we have identified, but also then to provide actual actionable recommendations of how one could mitigate those risks and reduce those liabilities. That's the first offer. So 5 organizations, if you explain your case and you in the first 5 that qualify, then we are happy to make time for you. The second offer is bigger, and that is we are opening 3 founding clients spots in the AI factory. What does that mean? That means everything I just said, so we can still have that conversation, but on top of that, you would have prioritized access to Carl and the team, and that would allow you then to prioritize your AI integration or your AI assessment or your AI transformation if you're not quite happy where you are now. So in other words, you get to test ride or test drive the AI factory first, but you also get input, you get a seat at the table where we are going next with the AI factory, because any software product is never finished. There's always more features to be added. There's always more functionality to be unlocked. And so if you want to be the pioneer that says, I felt this was still needed to be added to the AI factory, I want to influence the roadmap for the AI factory, then that's your chance. And for those founding clients, we will then also create case study profiles so that you also have a tangible output that you can share with your I said shareholders, I meant stakeholders and shareholders, about what that AI factory did for you and how it solved some of your problems. So with that announcement out of the way, I'm happy to receive any questions. I'm not seeing any though. I wonder if anybody is unable to type. Yes, we have one comment. Okay. Jean, you asking how do we become one of the 5? That's very easy. You can just send me an email. You can. I guess you've already raised your hand, so that's an easy one. And I think we then need to have a follow-up conversation to make sure that what you have in mind and what's possible with the AI factory is indeed aligned. Okay. Any other questions? It doesn't look like it. Slightly surprised because I thought this was a harder one to follow than some of the episodes we've had in the past, but maybe that's also why there are no questions. So we're gonna stay online for a minute or 2 more. Otherwise, if there are no further questions, then I want to thank everyone for joining us. And also, oh, there we are. We have one question. Okay, we'll address the question. I also want to use the opportunity to share about next month. So we are keeping the tradition, 1 episode a month. Next month, I will be interviewing Professor Karin Howell from the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Muizenberg, near Cape Town. And we'll announce the details of that interview very shortly on LinkedIn. Okay, so how do you validate your synthetic data for accuracy and representativeness? And what happens in large data sets? That's a great question.
Oh. So, well, it depends on what you need to do with the data. So, if like what you want to do with the data is you want to build a dashboard, you just want to have all the categories. For example, like if you want to represent all the provinces, you just need to have some patients in all provinces. I think what you are alluding to is like if you want to do like proper statistical analysis of things, then the way that we are creating the synthetic data for this particular example wouldn't be sufficient. So like it's a bit of a sort of like a circular logic thing, because if you want to create synthetic data fit for statistical analyses, then you would probably want to introduce some differentiation and some predicting variable that you know is there and that you want to find. Yeah, so it very much depends on what, and then there's some much more technical ways of going about that, like generative or adversarial networks. I don't know if the synthetic data, you can have a great time like creating data that's very representative. You can also if you know abstractly what are the patterns that emerge from the data that you are trying to recreate, what were the demographic trends, then you can, in the way that you create the synthetic data, recreate that. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe if I can add to that, so the GAN approach is definitely one, the generative adversarial network. So that means we are using a machine learning model to try. So the GAN has two parts. It's almost like a schizophrenic personality. So half of the GAN says, here's some fake data. Can you tell the difference between what's fake and what's not? And then the other half tries to guess what's real and what's not. If it guesses correctly, that means it's poorly specified fake data. If it's confused and it guesses wrong as many times as it guesses right, then that fake data was really accurate. So that is one way of creating fake data that looks like real data. Another option, so that's the machine learning approach. Another option from statistics would be treating the fake data as if you've lost. So let's say you have a data set with 10,000 rows. You want 20,000 rows. You can pretend that you always had 20,000 rows and you've lost half of it. So you could, in an iterative approach, start sampling from the first 10,000 rows and say, I still know that their ages, for instance, and their genders, but everything else I've forgotten. And now you use machinery that was actually designed for imputation of missing data to generate new data. So the whole world of multiple imputation can be recycled as a tool for creating synthetic data. And that's something that we've done in the past. That's very well-established statistical methodology that you don't need a large language model for. So you can do that without exposing the real data to the large language models. Okay, with that said, I think I want to thank everyone again for staying attentive and for paying interest. And I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, Carl, for all of the very insightful explanations. And hopefully we get to use the AI Factory a lot in the near future.
Great. Thanks, Wim.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending.